In our Late News Tonight Verify segment, we're talking about concussion. Brian May, you've been dealing with this for a long time in stories and coverage, and it doesn't just affect football players, but any kind of student athlete.
It really does cover all sports, and it's a question I think that's come to the forefront once again since the movie Concussion came out 2 years ago, because that movie raised awareness, and now parents are once again asking how serious is it. And the mother that we talked to tonight in our Verify asked the question, should I let my 9-year-old son play tackle football?
State-of-the-art football helmets. One local school was one of the first to try these helmets this season that monitor blows to the head. So how did they hold up? At the beginning of the high school football season, Brian, you did a story on the Cordova Lancers and these special helmets that they have that register hits to the head the players get. I was so surprised to hear that the city of Rancho Cordova paid for all of those.
They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of bond money and bought helmets for every player from varsity on down to freshmen. And the helmets have a special membrane, and they would tell the coaches or alert them of any questionable hit. They didn't necessarily diagnose concussions, but questionable hits so the players could be checked out. And now that Cordova's season is over with, we wanted to go back and see how they worked. Well, and as it turns out, Cordova did have some concussions during the season. And again, those helmets didn't register the concussions, but they're an extra set of eyes and ears to alert the coaches there could be something wrong.
They are expensive, but it is a nice tool to have if you can get it. Now, what about the medical community? Because a lot of parents, they'll go to their doctor and ask, should I let my kid play?
Well, and it is the medical community that is driving this whole concussion discussion, both on the high school level and on the youth level. And I sat down today with Dr. Jeff Tanji, one of the leading medical experts in the sports field across the entire country, and I asked him specifically, if you had a 9-year-old son, would you let him play football? Dr. Tanji and I were joking about when we grew up playing football, if you got knocked out, all they did, they would bust the smelling salt open, which was straight ammonia, and they'd wave it under your nose, and if you came to, then you went back in the game. Things have changed a lot, and they're going to continue to change.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, so at this point, if you don't have a kid who plays football or wants to play football, you might be saying, what does this matter to me?
But did your daughters play soccer?
They did.
Mine are playing as well, and so it affects, if you have kids playing soccer as well. We'll talk more about that after the break.
Before the break, we were talking about the prevalence of concussion in football, but your daughters play soccer. Mine played soccer a long time ago, and that can be dangerous too.
My daughter actually broke her arm like 3 games into the season. Fortunately, no concussions, but especially at youth soccer, it is very dangerous. And the one question, if you have a child playing youth soccer, the one question you really want to ask is, are my coaches looking for the right things?
Brian, this is such great information because while we're all cheering our kids on the sidelines, it's nice to know that the coach has the training to be able to look and see what's happening on the field if our kid gets injured.
And complete point of transparency, that was my daughter's soccer coaches that we interviewed for the story, and that's one of the reasons that I am so comfortable with letting her play, is because I see what happens at practice and during the games, and they're on top of it at all times. They know what to look for.
And it's okay to ask your kid's coach, do you have the training to recognize concussion?
They should want to answer that question when you ask it to.
California voters have a big decision to make. They need to decide whether to allow offenders up and down California to get out of prison early. Prop 57 would make it easier for nonviolent felons to get out on parole. And coincidentally, a new LA Times poll shows 57% of Californians support the measure, which could affect about 25,000 inmates.
And some of them spend even more time in juvenile hall. Imagine you're a kid between the ages of 10 and 18, and you're forced into solitary confinement day after day in a cell this big, 8 feet by 10 feet. Now, yes, you've committed a crime, but is this any way to rehabilitate bad kids? The president and the governor say no. So things in California are changing big time. Anna Grazia has the story.
So here in Sacramento at the Youth Detention Facility, there is no room for solitary confinement. If a kid acts up and gets in trouble, they go back to the room where they live and where they sleep.
What these kids need is they need normalcy to some degree.
Now, Sacramento's Youth Detention Facility isn't Disneyland for bad kids, but it isn't your average juvie.
I think we're doing some really innovative and unique things. I can't speak for all the juvenile halls across the state or the country, but what we're trying to do is really just do good work with kids.
Mike Shores knows because he oversees the facility and thinks his programming is effective. It's making kids change and not come back.
Keep a kid active and busy and involved in something that's got their attention. Ideally, it's fun and educational, and something that's going to help the kid learn while they're here, so that when they leave, they can take that with them and hopefully help them change their behavior.
We're now transitioning to the winter garden.
Do you know how much food these boxes produce every year?
In the summertime, 800 or 900 pounds.
800 or 900 pounds of fruits and vegetables come out of these boxes that these kids. That's awesome.
Gentle and calm. The purpose is to calm her down before you get started.
From raising crops to raising animals and learning how to paint, teaching empathy and responsibility. Mike says evidence shows being punitive towards adolescents doesn't work, but rewards do. So this is one of the incentives. Kids can come and hang out with Vernon at the Boys and Girls Club for 2 hours a week. Ooh, I got one. The facility can hold up to 224 boys and girls, but while we were there, we only saw 124. Mike told me it's difficult to track if their idea of taking away freedom and replacing it with positive activities to change behavior works. But he says he thinks it is, because kids aren't coming back as often as they were.
This is still juvenile hall. It's still a very structured environment, and there are rules that have to be followed. When kids don't follow those rules, some of those incentives are not going to be available to them.
Putting them in time out or solitary in their room, he says, isn't the first option. They send them here.
This is an area, instead of going into a locked room, or confinement, we bring them in here and work through.
But if a juvenile is violent and uncontrollable, room confinement is the best case scenario, and they can be in there for up to 24 hours. Mike says it's uncommon. In 2010, average room confinement for a juvenile at this facility was 125 hours a month. Now it's down to 15 hours a month. So with Governor Brown signing SB 124, making it so juveniles can only be in solitary for up to 4 hours, Mike said the change isn't hard.
Limiting the period of time that kids can be in their room sets us up really well to be well ahead of the timelines to be in compliance with the law in 2018.
Now, not all facilities are like this one. 2018 will be the test if doing without solitary works throughout the state. In Sacramento, Andy Grazia, ABC 10 News.
Nightline's Dan Harris learned firsthand just what solitary confinement is really like. During his story in 2012, he spent 48 hours locked up.
We arrive at what will be my new home. It's 7 by 12 feet, all concrete and metal. I am in solitary confinement.
Pretty soon after he settled in, he heard the screaming coming from nearby cells.
It's virtually impossible to get an uninterrupted night's sleep here because there's so much noise.
Well, 2 years ago, California agreed to move nearly 2,000 state prisoners out of solitary confinement as part of a landmark lawsuit settlement. Some of those people had been locked up with almost no human contact for more than 30 years. Other states also talking about making changes right now. Florida's Department of Corrections is considering changing its solitary confinement policies, facing pressures from groups who consider it an inhumane form of punishment.